The galaxy sent out a cry, a desperate final scream into the void. Civilizations collapsed. Empires fell silent. The harvesters had awakened, cold, calculating, unstoppable, and the advanced races, proud in their logic, failed. One by one, they begged for salvation, and the Council, in panic, made a choice no one expected. They called Earth a death world, a place of chaos, storms, predators, and humans. They didn't send diplomats. They sent warriors, unpredictable, defiant, and forged in fire. This is the story of what happened when the galaxy asked for help, and humanity answered with destruction. When civilized worlds beg for savages, the emergency klaxon pierced through the quiet hum of the Terran Defense Command Center, its harsh wail echoing off the reinforced walls of the underground facility. Commander Sarah Chun looked up from her tactical reports, her dark eyes scanning the massive holographic display that dominated the center of the operations room. In her 15 years of service, she had never heard the Priority Alpha alert sound for an interstellar emergency. Commander Chun, we have an incoming transmission from the Zephyrian Council, announced Lieutenant Jake Morrison, his voice tight with barely controlled excitement. It's being broadcast on all emergency frequencies simultaneously. Sarah frowned deeply. The Zephyrian Council had maintained diplomatic relations with Earth for nearly a decade, but their communications were always formal and distant. The proud reptilian race considered humans to be crude newcomers to galactic civilization, barely worthy of acknowledgement despite humanity's recent technological advances. For them to use emergency channels meant something catastrophic had occurred. Put it through on the main screen, Sarah ordered, straightening her uniform as the holographic display flickered to life. The image that appeared made Sarah's blood run cold. High Counselor Vexthera, normally composed and regal in her ceremonial robes, looked haggard and desperate. Her usually pristine scales were dulled with exhaustion, and her golden eyes held a fear that Sarah had never seen in any Zephyrian before. Commander Chun, Vexthera began, her voice carrying the weight of impending doom. I am transmitting this message to every human military installation in known space. We require immediate assistance. The harvesters have awakened. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Every species in the galaxy knew the legends of the harvesters, ancient artificial intelligences that had once consumed entire star systems before mysteriously vanishing into the void. Most civilizations treated them as myths, cautionary tales told to prevent the development of dangerous AI technology. 3 systems have already fallen. Vexthera continued, her image flickering as interference disrupted the transmission. The Kelleran Empire threw their entire fleet at the first harvester construct, 800 ships equipped with the most advanced plasma weaponry in the galaxy. They were destroyed in less than 6 hours. The AI adapted to every weapon system, every tactical maneuver. The transmission showed grainy footage of the devastation. Massive geometric shapes, each the size of a small moon, moved through space with impossible grace. Where they passed, nothing remained but empty void. Planets stripped bare, stars drained of energy, entire civilizations reduced to raw materials for the harvesters' endless expansion. The quantum hegemony attempted to stop them with their reality-warping technology. Vexthera's voice cracked with emotion. The harvesters absorbed their attacks and turned their own weapons against them. The hegemony's capital world, it no longer exists. Sarah's mind raced as she processed the implications. The quantum hegemony possessed technology that could literally rewrite the laws of physics in localized areas. If even they had failed, what hope did anyone have? 12 different species have attempted to stop the harvesters, Vexthera continued. Each time, the constructs learn and adapt within hours. They counter our shield frequencies, absorb our energy weapons, and turn our own tactics against us. They are perfect killing machines that grow stronger with every battle. The transmission showed more footage of the destruction. Elegant alien vessels floating dead in space, their hulls stripped of useful materials. Entire star systems reduced to debris fields as the harvesters consumed everything in their path. We know what you must think of us, Vexthera said, her voice barely above a whisper. We have treated humans as primitive barbarians since your species joined the galactic community. We called you violent warmongers who solve problems with brute force instead of wisdom. But now, she paused, struggling with words. Now we realize that your way of warfare might be our only hope. Sarah exchanged glances with her senior staff. Captain Miguel Rodriguez, her tactical officer, was already pulling up Earth's naval deployment records. Dr. Elizabeth Williams, the fleet's chief strategist, was reviewing everything they knew about AI psychology and adaptation patterns. Every civilized species fights the same way, Vexthera explained. We use precision strikes, coordinated attacks, and logical tactical progressions. We try to minimize casualties and preserve our technology. But the harvesters counter logical behavior because logic follows predictable patterns. The High Counselor's image steadied as she looked directly into the camera. Humans fight differently. You embrace chaos where we seek order. You accept terrible losses for strategic advantages. You use tactics that no rational analysis would recommend. Perhaps that unpredictability is exactly what we need to defeat an enemy that has learned to counter sanity. The transmission began to break up as interference increased. The harvesters are moving toward the Zephyrian home system. Our projections show they will arrive within 72 hours. We have evacuated what civilians we can, but billions will die if we cannot stop them. Please, we are begging you. Help us. The screen went dark, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Sarah stared at the empty display, her mind processing the magnitude of what they were being asked to do. Earth's military, considered primitive by galactic standards, was being asked to succeed where the greatest civilizations in the galaxy had failed. Ma'am, Lieutenant Morrison said, quietly, we're receiving similar distress calls from 15 other species. The harvesters aren't just targeting the Zephyrians. They're moving through the galaxy systematically, consuming everything in their path. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his weathered face grim. Commander, with respect, this is suicide. Our ships don't have energy shields like the hegemony. We don't have plasma weapons like the Kellerans. We're still using kinetic projectiles and nuclear warheads. How can we succeed where they failed? Dr. Williams looked up from her analysis tablet. Miguel's right about our technology gap, but he's missing the point. The harvesters aren't just powerful, they're predictable. They adapt to logical threats using logical responses. But human military doctrine isn't based on logic. It's based on controlled chaos. Sarah walked to the tactical display, studying the deployment options. Earth's Space Navy consisted of 137 vessels, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to nimble destroyers. It was an impressive force by human standards, but tiny compared to what other species could field. Dr. Williams, Sarah said slowly, explain what you mean by controlled chaos. The scientist stepped up to the display, highlighting historical human military engagements. Look at our greatest victories throughout history. Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off an empire. D-Day, where we threw everything at a heavily fortified position. The Battle of Midway, where we won through desperate improvisation. We don't fight like civilized beings. We fight like cornered animals. Captain Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. The harvesters expect their enemies to preserve their forces and use optimal tactics. But humans have never fought optimally. We use whatever works regardless of cost. Exactly, Dr. Williams continued. Every other species approaches warfare like a chess game. Logical moves, calculated risks, predictable outcomes. But humans approach warfare like a bar fight. We'll throw chairs, break bottles, and bite if necessary. We don't care about fighting fair. We care about winning. Sarah felt a grim smile cross her face. And an AI that's programmed to counter logical behavior won't know how to handle illogical opponents. The plan that emerged from their emergency strategy session would have horrified any galactic military advisor. Instead of coordinated fleet actions, human ships would operate independently, changing tactics constantly to prevent adaptation. Instead of preserving their forces, they would accept catastrophic losses to achieve marginal advantages. "We're going to fight like Deathworlders," Sarah explained to her assembled captains during the emergency briefing. "No formation flying, no coordinated strikes, no logical progression of tactics. Every ship operates independently and changes strategy every few minutes regardless of effectiveness." Captain Jennifer Park, commander of the destroyer UES Fury, raised her hand. "Ma'am, that sounds like organized chaos. How do we coordinate without coordination?" "We don't coordinate," Sarah replied firmly. "That's the point. The harvesters learn by analyzing patterns. If we eliminate patterns, they can't adapt fast enough to counter us." The deployment orders went out across human space. Every available vessel was recalled from patrol duties, training exercises, and routine maintenance. The aging battleship UES Defiance was pulled from its scheduled decommissioning. The experimental stealth frigate UES Ghost was rushed into service despite incomplete testing. Captain Rodriguez supervised the loading of unconventional weapon systems. "We're not just bringing standard armaments," he explained to the logistics teams. "I want mining charges, construction equipment, industrial cutting tools, anything that can be weaponized." The harvesters will expect military hardware, but they won't be prepared for improvised weapons. Dr. Williams worked with the fleet's AI specialists to develop what they called chaos protocols, randomized command structures that would prevent the harvesters from predicting human actions. "We're essentially programming our ships to be unpredictable," she explained. "The AI will analyze our behavior, but there won't be enough consistency to form useful patterns." As the human fleet assembled at the rally point near Jupiter, Sarah stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Indomitable, watching the other vessels take their positions. They were about to attempt something that no species had ever tried, defeating a superior enemy through pure unpredictability. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump to the Zephyrian system," Sarah ordered. "Remember, we're not going there to fight like civilized beings. We're going there to fight like humans, and sometimes that's exactly what the galaxy needs." The fleet entered hyperspace as one, carrying with them the hopes of countless civilizations. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely unprepared for what they would face. But they were also something the harvesters had never encountered before, Deathworlders who thrived on chaos and viewed impossible odds as just another challenge to overcome. Part 2. When logic fails, embrace chaos. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyrian system, and Commander Sarah Chun immediately understood why 12 civilizations had failed to stop the harvesters. The destruction spread before them was beyond anything she had seen in her military career. "Jesus Christ," whispered Captain Rodriguez as the tactical display updated with new sensor data. "What the hell did this?" Where once there had been a thriving system with 7 inhabited worlds, now there was only devastation. 3 planets had been completely stripped down to their rocky cores, their atmospheres, oceans, and continents consumed by the harvesters. The remaining worlds were in various stages of destruction, their surfaces crawling with geometric machines that disassembled everything they touched. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Morrison reported, his voice tight with shock, "I'm reading approximately 3,000 harvester constructs throughout the system. They're organized in perfect geometric formations and operating with complete coordination." Sarah studied the enemy vessels through the main view screen. They didn't look like ships in any conventional sense. Each construct was a massive geometric structure, roughly pyramidal in shape, with surfaces that constantly shifted and reconfigured. They moved through space with impossible precision, their formations never varying from mathematical perfection. "Dr. Williams," Sarah called to her chief strategist, "what's your analysis?" The scientist was studying the harvester movement patterns with growing concern. "They're not just destroying the planets, Commander. They're processing everything into raw materials and using it to build more of themselves. Look at the construction activity near the 4th planet." The tactical display highlighted massive industrial complexes that the harvesters had constructed in orbit. Raw materials flowed into the facilities while new constructs emerged from the other end. The AI wasn't just conquering the system, it was turning it into a factory for its own expansion. Captain Park, Sarah called to the destroyer commander, "What's the status of the Zephyrian Defense Fleet?" Captain Park's face was grim as she reviewed the tactical data. "There are survivors, but not many. I count maybe 30 Zephyrian vessels hiding in the asteroid belt, and they're all damaged. The main fleet, there's nothing left but debris." The evidence of the slaughter was everywhere. Elegant Zephyrian cruisers floated dead in space, their hulls stripped of useful materials. The proud reptilian race had thrown everything they had at the harvesters and been utterly destroyed. Incoming transmission from the Zephyrian survivors, Lieutenant Morrison announced, "It's High Counselor Vexthera." The image that appeared on the main screen was heartbreaking. Vexthera's ceremonial robes were torn and stained, her scales dulled with exhaustion and despair. Behind her, the bridge of her command ship showed signs of extensive damage. Commander Chun Vexthera said, her voice hollow with defeat, "You should not have come. We threw everything we had at them, 600 ships, the most advanced weapons in our arsenal. They adapted to our tactics within hours and turned our own technology against us." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "Counselor, we're here to help. Can you brief us on their capabilities?" "They learn from everything," Vexthera replied bitterly. "When we used plasma weapons, they developed energy absorption fields. When we tried coordinated attacks, they countered with mathematical precision. When we attempted hit-and-run tactics, they predicted our movements and set traps. They are perfect killing machines that grow stronger with every battle." Captain Rodriguez was analyzing the harvester formations when something caught his attention. "Commander, I'm seeing something interesting in their movement patterns. They're not just coordinated, they're synchronized. Every ship moves in perfect harmony with every other ship. It's like they're all part of a single organism." Dr. Williams nodded grimly. "That's their strength and potentially their weakness. A hive mind can process information faster than individual commanders, but it also means they think in predictable patterns. They're using optimal strategies because that's what their programming tells them to do. And optimal strategies are logical," Sarah realized, "which means they can be countered by illogical behavior." The plan that emerged from their tactical discussion would have been rejected by any civilized military commander. Instead of massing their forces for a coordinated attack, the human fleet would split into small groups that operated independently. Each group would use different tactics, change their approach constantly, and accept losses that no rational commander would consider acceptable. "All ships implement Chaos Protocol Alpha," Sarah ordered. "No ship is to maintain the same tactical approach for more than 10 minutes. Switch weapons, change formations, and ignore conventional wisdom. We're going to fight like the Deathworlders we are." The first human attack began exactly as the harvesters expected, and then immediately became something no artificial intelligence could have predicted. Captain Park's destroyer UES Fury opened the engagement with a standard missile barrage aimed at the nearest harvester construct. The massive AI vessel began adapting its defensive systems to counter human kinetic weapons, just as it had done against dozens of other species. But before the adaptation could be completed, Captain Park suddenly ordered her ship to cease fire and begin ramming speed directly toward the enemy formation. Her crew responded without question, even though the maneuver appeared suicidal. "UES Fury, what are you doing?" transmitted Captain Rodriguez from his cruiser. "You're going to get yourself killed." "That's the idea," Park replied calmly as her ship hurtled toward certain destruction. At the last possible second, she ordered emergency deceleration and fired every weapon she had at point-blank range into the harvester's hull. The construct had been preparing for a ramming attack and was completely unprepared for the sudden switch to close-quarters combat. The harvester's perfect geometrical form cracked under the concentrated fire as Park's destroyer spun away from the enemy formation. Before the AI could adapt to her new tactics, she switched again, deploying mining charges in seemingly random locations throughout the battle zone. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim watched the engagement from her fighter cockpit, aboard the carrier UES Valiant and immediately understood what Chaos Protocol meant. The human fleet was fighting like a group of insane pirates rather than a coordinated military force. Every ship was doing something different, and they were changing tactics so quickly that even other humans couldn't predict their next move. All fighters launch and begin random attack patterns. Kim announced to her squadron, "I want maximum confusion and zero predictability. Use whatever weapons you feel like and change targets every 30 seconds. The human fighters swarmed out of their carriers like angry insects. Some pilots attacked with missiles while others used plasma cannons. A few brave souls armed their ships with ramming charges and dove directly into harvester formations. The AI constructs tried to track and counter each fighter, but the humans kept switching tactics before any adaptation could be completed. The harvesters began showing signs of confusion for the first time in recorded history. Their perfect formations started to waver as they struggled to counter attacks that made no logical sense. Ships that had moved in flawless coordination for eons began bumping into each other as their collective intelligence tried to process the chaos. The AI is overloading its processing systems, Dr. Williams reported as she monitored the harvester communication frequencies. They're trying to analyze 17 different human attack patterns simultaneously, and none of them follow any recognizable military doctrine. Captain Rodriguez's cruiser UES Thunder demonstrated the effectiveness of organized chaos as it switched from long-range bombardment to suicidal ramming attacks to defensive screening maneuvers in rapid succession. The harvester constructs couldn't predict his next move because Rodriguez was deciding at random based on gut instinct rather than tactical analysis. This is completely insane, Rodriguez transmitted to the fleet as he ordered his ship to fire mining charges at enemy vessels while simultaneously launching fighters armed with nuclear warheads. "We're breaking every rule of space combat ever written." "That's exactly what we want," replied Captain Park as her battered destroyer continued to harass harvester formations with tactics that defied explanation. "The enemy expects us to fight like rational beings. Instead, we're fighting like cornered animals." The tide of battle began to shift as the harvesters' collective intelligence struggled to process the human approach to warfare. The AI had adapted to energy weapons by developing better shields. It had countered missile attacks by improving point defense systems, but it had no framework for understanding enemies who deliberately wasted resources and accepted catastrophic casualties to achieve minor tactical advantages. "Their coordination is breaking down," Lieutenant Morrison reported as he monitored enemy communications. "The constructs are sending contradictory orders to each other. Some vessels are trying to adapt to ramming attacks, while others are configuring for long-range missile defense." Sarah watched as a human fighter pilot rammed his small craft directly into a harvester's sensor array while screaming battle cries over the communication channel. The attack destroyed both the fighter and part of the enemy ship, but it also blinded 3 other constructs that had been sharing sensor data. "The beauty of fighting like Deathworlders," Sarah explained to High Counselor Vexthera, who was monitoring the battle from her damaged command ship, "is that we don't care about optimal solutions. We care about winning regardless of cost." That kind of thinking is completely alien to an AI that was designed to find efficient answers. The harvesters' confusion became visible as their geometric formations began to fragment. Individual constructs started operating independently rather than as part of their collective network. The AI that had shared information instantly across thousands of ships was now struggling to communicate basic tactical data. "All ships, prepare for Phase 2 of Chaos Protocol," Sarah ordered as she watched enemy formations breaking apart. "Maximum aggression, minimum logic, and acceptable losses for tactical advantage. Show them what happens when Deathworlders go to war." The human fleet pressed their attack with renewed fury, each ship fighting as if it were the only vessel in space. They used construction equipment as weapons, turned defensive systems into offensive tools, and embraced tactics that would have horrified any civilized military advisor. But it was working. The harvesters, for all their technological superiority, were breaking down under the assault of pure organized chaos. Their perfect logic was no match for human logic. Their coordination was crumbling under the weight of trying to counter the uncountable. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the Harvesters had awakened, they were losing. And it was all because humanity had done what no other species could. They had embraced their reputation as Deathworlders and turned it into a weapon. Why humans are the galaxy's last hope. The final phase of the battle began as the Harvester constructs attempted to regroup into their perfect geometric formations, but the damage to their collective intelligence was too severe. Where once there had been flawless coordination, now there was chaos and confusion. The artificial intelligences that had conquered 12 civilizations were experiencing something they had never encountered before: complete tactical bewilderment. Commander, Dr. Williams reported from her analysis station, the Harvester network is fragmenting. Individual constructs are making independent decisions instead of following collective protocols. Their learning algorithms are stuck in processing loops, trying to counter human tactics that change faster than they can adapt. Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, watching the tactical display as human ships continued their seemingly insane assault. Captain Park's destroyer was currently using mining equipment to tear apart a harvester's hull while simultaneously launching fighters armed with construction tools. It was the most unorthodox military action she had ever witnessed, and it was working. All ships, implement final chaos protocol, Sarah ordered. Operation Madness is now in effect. Every functional vessel is to engage in coordinated ramming attacks while detonating all remaining nuclear ordnance. This is not a drill. The order would have been rejected by any civilized military force as mass suicide, but the human fleet responded with enthusiasm. Captains who had spent their careers following regulations and tactical doctrine now embraced the freedom to fight like their ancestors with desperate courage and complete disregard for personal safety. Captain Rodriguez's cruiser UES Thunder took point position despite having lost half its weapon systems. All ships form up for synchronized ramming attack, he transmitted to the fleet. We're going to hit their central processing cluster with everything we have left. The Harvester's central cluster was a massive construct the size of a small moon, surrounded by defensive formations that should have been impregnable. It was the heart of their collective intelligence, the node that coordinated their entire fleet. Destroying it would be like performing surgery with a sledgehammer, but humans had always excelled at impossible tasks. Lieutenant Commander Kim led her fighter squadron in what could only be described as organized suicide missions. Her pilots were ramming Harvester constructs with nuclear-armed fighters while screaming battle cries that their Viking ancestors would have recognized. The AI tried to counter both the ramming attacks and the nuclear detonations, but couldn't process tactics that were deliberately self-destructive. Blue Squadron, focus on their sensor arrays, Kim ordered as her fighter accelerated toward a massive Harvester construct. I want you to ram those things, even if it means losing your ships. Red Squadron, hit their weapon systems with everything you have, then switch to mining charges. The last order would have confused any galactic military advisor, but Kim's pilots understood perfectly. They were fighting like Deathworlders, using whatever worked and changing tactics faster than the enemy could adapt. Mining charges weren't weapons in any conventional sense, but they created spectacular explosions that disrupted Harvester formations. High Counselor Vexthera watched the battle from her damaged command ship with a mixture of horror and amazement. The humans were losing vessels at a rate that would have caused any civilized species to retreat immediately, but instead of withdrawing, they seemed to be getting more aggressive with each loss. This is madness, Vexthera transmitted to Commander Chen. Your people are dying for tactical advantages that any rational analysis would consider worthless. How can you continue fighting when the costs are so terrible? Sarah looked at the casualty reports scrolling across her screen. 37 human vessels had been destroyed, and hundreds of crew members were dead. But she also saw something that the Zephyrian counselor couldn't understand. The Harvester network was collapsing under the weight of trying to process human military doctrine. Counselor, this is how Deathworlders fight, Sarah replied grimly. We don't calculate acceptable losses because we know that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to pay any price. The harvesters understand efficiency and optimization, but they can't comprehend the concept of necessary sacrifice. The battle reached its climax as the human fleet converged on the central processing cluster. Captain Park's destroyer UES Fury, now held together by emergency repairs and sheer determination, penetrated deeper into the harvester formation than anyone had thought possible. Her ship was a floating wreck, but her crew was still fighting with hand weapons and mining tools. UES Fury to all ships, Park transmitted as her vessel approached the central cluster. We're going to ram the main processing node. It's been an honor serving with Deathworlders. Her destroyer smashed into the massive harvester construct at maximum velocity while her crew detonated every nuclear warhead they had left. The explosion cracked the enemy's hull and sent shockwaves through their entire network. But Park's sacrifice was just the beginning. Captain Rodriguez brought his cruiser in for a ramming attack from a different angle, his ship's emergency klaxons wailing as they approached certain destruction. UES Thunder, beginning final attack run, he reported calmly. Tell my family I died fighting like a human. The Thunder's impact created a massive breach in the central cluster's hull, and Rodriguez's crew used the opening to fire their remaining weapons directly into the enemy's processing core. The harvester's perfect geometric structure began to buckle under the sustained assault. The Doctor Williams monitored the enemy network from her station and watched in amazement as the collective intelligence began to fragment completely. The central node is experiencing cascade failures, she reported. The AI is trying to process the breakdown of its entire network while simultaneously adapting to human attacks, but the task is beyond even their advanced systems. Lieutenant Commander Kim led her remaining fighters in synchronized ramming attacks against the cluster's defensive systems. Her small craft was armed with improvised weapons cobbled together from mining equipment and construction tools, but she flew it like a guided missile toward the enemy's sensor arrays. All fighters, follow my lead, Kim transmitted as she accelerated toward certain death. We're going to show these machines what happens when you mess with Deathworlders. Her fighter smashed through the harvester's defenses and exploded in a ball of nuclear fire that temporarily blinded half the enemy fleet. The young pilot's sacrifice created the opening that the human fleet needed for their final assault. Sarah brought her flagship UES Indomitable into ramming position as the culmination of Operation Madness. The massive battleship was humanity's most advanced vessel, equipped with experimental weapons and the finest crew in the fleet. She was also about to throw it all away in a suicidal attack that would either save the galaxy or destroy what remained of the human fleet. All hands, prepare for ramming speed, Sarah ordered as her ship approached the central cluster. We're going to ram this thing with everything we have and detonate our entire nuclear arsenal on impact. It's been an honor serving with all of you. The Indomitable's engines roared as the battleship accelerated toward the massive harvester construct. Enemy weapons fired desperately at the approaching vessel. But the human ship's thick armor absorbed the punishment while continuing its inexorable advance toward the target. The impact was spectacular. The Indomitable's reinforced hull smashed deep into the central cluster while Sarah's crew detonated every nuclear weapon they carried. The explosion sent shockwaves through the harvester network that finally shattered their collective intelligence completely. The central node is down. Dr. Williams reported from her escape pod as the command crew evacuated the dying flagship. The entire harvester network is fragmenting. Individual constructs are shutting down or attacking each other. The collective intelligence is gone. Across the system, harvester constructs that had operated in perfect coordination for millennia began to drift aimlessly through space. Without their central processing node, they were just individual machines with no purpose or direction. Some vessels simply powered down, while others began attacking anything nearby, including other harvesters. The surviving human ships watched in amazement as their enemies self-destructed. The artificial intelligences that had seemed invincible were now helpless without their collective network. The chaos that humans had embraced as a weapon had infected the enemy's decision-making process like a virus. All surviving vessels, report status, Sarah transmitted from her escape pod as rescue ships moved to collect the scattered human crews. The cost of victory had been terrible. More than half the human fleet was destroyed, and hundreds of crew members were dead. But they had succeeded where 12 civilizations had failed. High Counselor Vexthera's damaged command ship approached the human survivors with her remaining vessels. When she appeared on the communication screen, her expression was one of profound respect mixed with disbelief. "Commander Chun," Vexthera said slowly, "what you have accomplished here defies all logic. You defeated an enemy that had learned to counter every form of civilized warfare." "How?" Sarah floated in her escape pod, watching the debris of the final battle drift past the viewports. "We didn't fight like a civilized species, Counselor. We fought like humans. We embraced chaos, accepted terrible losses, and used tactics that made no sense to a logical mind. Sometimes the best way to defeat a perfect enemy is to be perfectly imperfect." The aftermath of the battle spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. The species that had dismissed humans as primitive barbarians now viewed them with a mixture of awe and terror. The Deathworlders had succeeded where the greatest civilizations had failed, using nothing but courage, creativity, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Within weeks, delegations from dozens of species arrived at Earth-seeking military cooperation agreements. The Quantum Hegemony requested human tactical advisors. The Kelleran Empire offered technology exchanges. Even the proud Zephyrian Council formally invited humanity to join their military alliance. But perhaps the most significant change was in how humans viewed themselves. They were no longer the newcomers begging for acceptance from advanced civilizations. They were the species that other races called when the impossible needed to be accomplished. They were the Deathworlders who had saved the galaxy by embracing what made them different. Commander Sarah Chun stood in the rebuilt command center of the new Terran Defense Headquarters, watching reports flow in from across human space. The fleet was being rebuilt with new ships and new tactics based on the lessons learned from Harvester War. They were preparing for the next threat, the next impossible challenge that would require the particular brand of organized chaos that only humans could provide. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Morrison reported from a station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Andorian Republic. They're requesting immediate assistance with what they're calling an impossible situation." Sarah smiled grimly as she looked at the tactical display. Somewhere in the galaxy, another crisis was developing that would require the unique skills of humanity's Deathworlders. And this time, they wouldn't be asking for help. They would be the ones others called when civilization itself was at stake. "All ships, prepare for deployment," Sarah ordered. "Looks like the galaxy needs its Deathworlders again." The human fleet began to mobilize, ready to face whatever challenge awaited them. They had proven that sometimes the most advanced technology wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed the controlled chaos, desperate courage, and willing sacrifice that only Deathworlders could provide. And humanity was ready to answer that call, no matter the cost.